Welcome to another edition of Inside O-Town. My name is Greg Norman. I think we've got an incredible show today. We're with Elissa Slotkin, who's running for the 8th Congressional District in Michigan. Quite a background. We're going to talk about all kinds of things. First of all, welcome to Ortonville.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're starting the campaign a little early, and I say a little early.
Yeah.
It's not till next year, so we're talking a little bit under a year from that perspective.
It's true. November of 2018.
I guess the first question is, why now? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I grew up here, my early life in Holly, on a family farm in Holly, and I was always interested in international affairs. My dad used to make me watch Tom Brokaw every night during dinner, you know, my entire career has been in national service, in national and public service. And I'm one of those people. I was in New York City on 9/11 when 9/11 happened. I was in my second day of graduate school. And I just decided after that event that I was going to dedicate my life to national service. So that's what I did. I joined the CIA. I spent many years, 3 tours in Iraq, going back and forth, serving alongside the military. I served at the Pentagon, at the White House. I served for both Republicans and Democrats, very proudly. My husband is a career Army officer. We met in Iraq. Apache pilot, yeah. And so we're a service family, and we just looked around at the tenor and the tone of politics over the past year, and we just said, this is fundamentally unbecoming of the country that we served. Okay. And so I started getting interested in what we could do to change that. Started learning about the incumbent here in the district, and started looking into it. But I'll be honest with you, I did not, running for office is a complicated thing to do. Especially if you want to do it clean, if you want to do it in a transparent way. So we were reticent to get in. We've always been public servants, so we didn't know much about running for office. I've never done it. And then May happened. And May, it's hard to remember, but May was the first time the U.S. Congress, the House, voted to repeal Obamacare without a replacement, right? To get rid of our health care. And for me, like a lot of people in this district, health care is extremely personal. My mother died in 2011 of ovarian cancer. My parents were divorced many years ago. And when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, she did not have health insurance. So I don't know if you've ever had, or I'm sure your viewers have had, that experience of getting a terminal diagnosis for someone that you love. But, your life explodes, just explodes. And you leave work and you're figuring out how to extend your mother's life. And I had that experience, like so many people in this district, of having my mother out on the MRI gurney, and they would not wheel her in until I wrote an $8,000 check. And they would not stick a needle in her arm to do her emergency blood work that she needed until we wrote a $12,000 check. And they wouldn't schedule the surgery that she needed to extend her life more than 3 months until we demonstrated we could pay for it. So we went on like that for a month. I was early 30s. I was just writing checks. What do? They have you over a barrel, It's your mother. So we did that, and we were preparing for her to declare bankruptcy. And through a total loophole, after a month, we got her back on. But when I watched the representatives, including our representative here, stand in the front row of the Rose Garden ceremony, proud, at the White House, and beaming and thrilled that they had voted to repeal our health care without reform, which we definitely need, without a replacement, without talking to anyone in the district, right? Average people, and saying, how will this affect you? Without talking to doctors and nurses here in Ortonville or Holly or anywhere. I just said, that's it. You don't get to do that. You don't get to vote against the interests of your people and keep your job.
So passion is driving you.
Big time.
More than politics.
Yeah, I mean, I was apolitical for my entire career, right? As a civil servant, I worked for the Bush administration, the Obama administration. I worked proudly for Democrats and Republicans. So this is not about scoring political points. This is about demanding more from our elected officials.
Well, I asked the question passion because it obviously sticks out as you're speaking. You can see that. I want to ask a couple questions, because they're pertinent to the second. There seems to be a groundswell recently, and you've kind of alluded to the fact that sort of this medical process is what's got moving you forward. There seems to be a gender movement with women across the country because of the politics. Are you a part of that? Is that at a time when I think we need more folks, that are dedicated to sort of bringing it back to the middle a little bit?
Yeah.
Is this the right time, right place?
Yeah, well, listen, I've worked my entire career in male-dominated fields, right? I was a CIA officer deployed to the Middle East, working in combat zones at the Defense Department. So,
but you're a woman running for a Democratic office for a national position.
Yeah.
I think that changes a little bit.
Yeah. So, listen, I think most women, especially in male-dominated environments, has seen some pretty ugly things in the workplace. And for generations, it's been basically to the detriment of a woman to come out and say something. And I think it's overall a positive thing that we're saying as a community right now that it's not okay for men to harass and accost women in the workplace and get away with it, right? So I think that's overall a good thing. I think, I believe we need to look at each case really specifically, right? I don't believe that everyone can be judge and jury all in one. But I do believe we need a serious, transparent process, like that's as serious as the allegations women are bringing up. And that's what we haven't had in the past, right? Women would bring things up and it would just sit on someone's desk, and then you'd realize that you got to get rid of that woman because she's a squeaky wheel. So it wasn't a positive experience for women to bring those things up, and I think hopefully now we'll find some sort of middle ground where women feel comfortable saying that this is happening to me, and they'll, the men, if they've done something wrong, should be dealt with.
Cool. We would like our viewers to know a little bit about you. I kind of want to take a half a step back before
Please.
we kind of get back to politics. You're a Holly, sort of early age, went to Cranbrook, Columbia, if I'm not mistaken.
Cornell for undergraduate, and Columbia for grad
Columbia.
school. Yeah.
Worked your way through and kind of working your way through your career with nationally, and now you're kind of coming back. Talk a little bit about your family. I know you're involved with the High Grade Meat Company, which is, if you haven't had a high grade ballpark frank, maybe talk a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a third generation Michigander, and our entire family story is connected to my great grandfather starting High Grade Foods. And he lived that classic American dream, right? He came over through Ellis Island and worked in the meat business at the lowest levels and worked his way up and ended up starting High Grade Foods. And the headquarters was in downtown Detroit for many, many years. So I still meet people who remember the building, who remember working there or knowing people who worked there. And my grandfather, who became president of the company, he said, he was the first generation American, and he said, there's nothing more American than having a farm. He had been to a farm once, according to family legend, in New Jersey, somewhere in New Jersey. And he drove out on Dixie Highway because there was no I-75, and he bought a farm in Holly in the 50s, 1956. And we had beef cattle, we had Black Angus. And so we had the meat company downtown, and we had the farm out here. And my dad and all his brothers joined the business and spent huge chunks of time on the farm. And then when I was a little girl in elementary school, that's where we lived. And we now lease the land and grow soybeans and feed corn, but no more Black Angus. But the farm and the meat company, we're hot dog people, right? We did all the meat for Nathan's Hot Dogs for the first 50 years. We, as you said, invented the ballpark frank at Tiger Stadium. So, we are a good Michigan family, and we're hot dog people.
Talk a little bit about your husband. You said he was a pilot
career Army officer. He and actually his father was an Air Force officer. So my husband moved around. It was a military family from birth. Went to West Point and was trained as an Apache pilot. And like I said, he and I met in Iraq. We were actually both stationed at Saddam Hussein's Republican Palace. So getting to know each other was like us going to the chow hall, when we were working 18 hours a day, going to the chow hall and talking. And then we would come out, and the military had put some ping pong tables out under Saddam's big domes and all the fake gold encrusted murals and things. And so we would eat some lunch, and then we'd play ping pong, and I would kick his butt in ping pong. And so that's how we got to know each other. And I have two stepdaughters. One of them is a brand new Army officer who graduated West Point, and the other one is a new physician who works at the VA. So we're a service family kind of through and through.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The 8th district is an interesting district that you're running in. The Democrats have had a hard time over the last couple of years putting good candidates forth. In 2016, they couldn't make up their mind who they wanted to run.
Yeah.
It's been a pretty hot seat. You've had Mike Rogers was served in this seat. I believe Debbie Stabenow served in the seat.
Many years ago, yeah.
So there's been an interesting process. What do you see the 8th district, and what do you see it representing, and how do you want to represent it?
Yeah. So it's interesting, we got into the campaign in July, was when we announced, so we've just been driving thousands of miles, talking to hundreds of people, speaking in front of people. And I think the strongest thing I can say about this area is people are independently minded, right? They're not going to be told what to do from a party, from Washington, especially not now. And so people are looking for strong leaders who are ready to work and fight for them. That's what they want, who see what they're going through and do something about it. And it's pretty simple. And I just think people, regardless of political party, are interested in something different, especially now in our kind of political conversation, because Washington isn't demonstrating any leadership, right? We cannot allow, and believe that Washington is going to change their ways.
Do you really believe one person can make a difference in Washington? Out of 535, do you really think one can make a difference?
Yeah. So I do. And by the way, there are people around the country who are running, especially veterans, who are running on both sides of the aisle, all across the country. If even a fraction of the people who are running now got into Congress, you would see a change in tone. People who know how to work across the aisle and are public servants first. I believe that.
I don't ask the question because I don't believe one person can. I ask the question because you have to believe that.
I do. I do, because I've actually seen, in national security, I think it's important training for a job like this, because, I say to people, I was deployed to Iraq 3 times. No one ever asked me if I was a Democrat or Republican. No one ever asked, because it didn't matter, because you're focused on the mission of protecting U.S. forces or protecting the U.S. homeland, right? When you're focused on a mission, all that other political stuff falls away. And I think we need a little bit more of that spirit in our domestic politics.
The district has been gerrymandered and bounced around for politics. The current guy sitting, Mike Bishop, sitting in it, interestingly enough, Rochester Hills ends up in the district. I think 3 years ago, 2012. There's some correlation. There's a big movement of pressed in Michigan to put gerrymandering on the map, to go back to traditional boundaries, which would be interesting. Are you supportive of the way gerrymandering is done? That's a dumb question. Are you supportive of changing it back to a more reasonable directive by geography rather than by the way you're trying to change votes?
Absolutely. I think the two things that have the most deep impact on our political system right now are gerrymandering on both sides, political gerrymandering, and money in politics, the corrupting influence of our campaign finance laws. So I'm in big support of what the gerrymandering folks are doing, because I think we need more centrists. We need people who understand and talk to each other as opposed to being sort of hyper-polarized.
The Washington Post had this great map about 6 months ago, and obviously if you use 8 miles as a baseline, and you look at a map based on county geography, right? It's all square for the most part until you get to those down boundaries against the lakes or wherever it might be. And then they showed the gerrymandering map on top of it. And it looked like a schizophrenic map laid over somebody who had an abnormal brain pattern, because we've so manipulated the process. And that's got to change. And if Michigan passes this process, I think it's the start of something politically pretty solid.
I think it's great. They've gotten a huge number of signatures. I've signed it myself, the petitions, and I think it's a wonderful thing, because wherever I go, people just feel like the game is rigged. That's an overwhelming sentiment, is that the political game is rigged, and they can smell it and they can feel it, whether it's money or gerrymandering. And I think this initiative that people have really come out for, I hope to see it on the ballot, and I hope that in 2-4 years' time, we start to see real change in how those boundaries, so that's just we bring back a level of fairness.
In local politics, what's the most important aspect for you to think about in relationship to the district? What do you see as the most important? What do you have to fight for in our district rather than all the other stuff?
I think in Michigan, we will always, for the foreseeable future, be talking about jobs in the economy. I think that people care about their pocketbooks and their kids, and all of that is deeply connected to making sure we have well-paid jobs and careers for people and their kids through the future here. And I think with the transition that's going on in our economy, particularly with automation, that we need to make sure that we are preparing our students, our youngest people, for those jobs of the future. So I'll give you an example. I see it every day. I'll be in Rochester Hills, and I'll go to a Chamber of Commerce meet with all the businesses. Their biggest problem is that they can't get enough qualified people in IT, coding, and cybersecurity, and then separately healthcare, right? So all the businesses are complaining about how much money they spend trying to recruit and retain people for those jobs. Then I'll drive 50 miles down the road, and I'll go to Highland or Heartland or somewhere around here, Holly, and I have a bunch of young people and their parents who will say, what should we do? What should the kids go into? We started a degree at State, but we were taking on too much debt. So my daughter dropped out. She's working at Big B Coffee, trying to figure out what to do. What should she go into? IT, coding, and cybersecurity, right? That's a solvable problem. If one part of the state has a real demand signal for jobs, really well-paid, highly qualified jobs that are careers for a lifetime, and another part of the district is trying to figure out what their kids should do, that's a solvable problem, right? And our community colleges need to have programs that take people in and train them up. They work part-time, they go to school part-time, and they go right into those businesses when they graduate.
Is part of our educational fix more vocational? Not everybody can go to college. I mean, we're finding out college is becoming more expensive. I get that part.
Yeah. So I think there are plenty of well-paid careers in this state that do not require a 4-year degree. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? If you're a kid that's great at video games and you've been doing computers your whole life, right? Then you are in a great position to go to a 6-month IT training program, work while you study, graduate, and go right into a job, and you will have a career the rest of your life. And that is an amazing opportunity. We have industries all over the state that are like that, but we aren't having that kind of conversation as leaders. We need like a summit of all these leaders, including the high schools, where kids know when they're in 9th or 10th grade, you know what, if I want a career for the rest of my life, here are the fields where I can do that, and so I better really study in math, and I better really watch my science. You got to tell these kids early, and they will go. They want to be well-off, well-paid people supporting their state. So you got to tell them earlier, and the high schools and the community colleges have got to be involved earlier and talk with the businesses that have the demand signal.
Interesting. We are going to take a quick break and come back, and we've been talking obviously with Elissa Slotkin, 8th Congressional District hopeful, and we'll be back in a second.
We all assume that gun owners have a knowledge about gun safety, but that's not always the case. There are simple precautions that gun owners can take to make sure that their firearms don't pose a danger for our community. Proper firearm storage is the #1 way to prevent tragic accidents. Use a gun lock or store your firearms in a locked safe. Gun safes are available at local retailers. Free gun locks are available at your police department. Through responsible storage, we can do our part to invest in safety. Lock it up, Oakland. Safe storage saves lives.
We're back talking with Elissa Slotkin, who's running for the 8th Congressional District here in Michigan against Mike Bishop. I was asking the question earlier off camera, did you run independently or did the party approach you about running?
Yeah, I never once thought of running in my entire life, I'll be honest with you. It was never on my bucket list. I never thought I'd run for office, and what triggered me thinking about it is my husband and I looking around, as I said, and just saying this is not, that political conversation is not becoming of our country. And then, you know, listen, in January I came back to farm here in Michigan, and I was thinking about what to do and trying to figure out what had happened here with the election and understanding it. I started asking some questions like, who runs in this district? How do you figure this out? How do you do this? And it was through that process, like I said, that I sort of, my husband and I looked at each other and we said, if not us, who? And if not now, when?
Well, and I asked a question earlier about passion because, and then about party for a couple of reasons. One of which is you're coming from a career where 93% of the American public, between soldiers and foreign service, have your back and love you and all the rest of it, going into a profession where your approval rates at 12%, 14% it might be. I mean, that's the change in environment and landscape is got to be what you had some conversation with you and your husband.
Oh yeah, I mean, we had people.
This is not a popular job. I didn't mean to
It's not. It's not.
It's not.
I had someone say to us, "Why are you trying to work so hard to get into an institution that has the lowest approval rating in the country?" And it's because I think that is deeply sad. The U.S. Congress is enshrined in the first article of the U.S. Constitution, and if we're not going to say that it needs to improve, if we're not going to do something about it and fight for it, then who will? And I get it. It is much easier to just hang back, stay in the national security world. My husband can stay in the military world, and everyone thinks we're doing a halfway decent job. But that's not, I've always gone to where the fight is, and this is the fight, right? If we don't recognize that now, with everything that's gone on this past year, and we can't wait for Washington to come and save us. We have to do it ourselves. People on the ground have to demonstrate that we're going to send different kinds of leaders to Washington.
I am a believer at the moment that we've hit bottom.
I agree with you.
And the trajectory only can go two ways.
I agree with you.
And the second trajectory is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we're, from all the process, it's become obsessive for all of us.
Yep.
We've all become a little more mean-spirited. We've all become a little angrier because of the way we deal with each other.
Yeah.
Can you see yourself as a Democrat voting for a Republican issue if it was a good issue?
Yes. If there was a compelling case.
Despite the tax bill that's has got a complete, there's not one Democrat going to vote for it.
Right, but I mean, the truth is, I think most people want tax reform. That's something that's positive. We want tax reform. But we just want it a process where we actually all talk together as a group, just like they did it 30 years ago, and where it actually benefits the majority middle class of our country, of our state, of our district.
When did compromise become a dirty word?
Yeah, I don't know. I agree with you because, again, my training in the national security world is that everyone comes, they make their best case, but we're all focused on the mission of helping our country. And I think that's what they've lost in Congress, right? How many of them, when they wake up in the morning, are thinking about their country first? Not many that I can tell on both sides of the aisle. So, and listen, we all grew up in Michigan, right? My dad was a Republican, my mother was a Democrat. We never used to fight with vitriol over politics. We fought over sports, right? That's what we fight over, is Michigan versus State, Michigan versus Ohio State. And so I think people are upset that Washington has made our Thanksgiving dinners uncomfortable.
I'm still a registered Republican, and most of my friends think I'm an anarchist because I'm so far left from what used to be. Yeah. So the parties have changed, and I get that. With a security background in the CIA, and I don't want to bring up Homeland, and certainly you can't compare your service to Carrie Matheson, because if you happen to watch Homeland, just explain to us that it's not the same. But in that same follow-up, explain what your background as a congressional hopeful would be. You're going to have some pretty strong foreign relationship process with as an expertise that a lot of people running for Congress aren't going to have.
Yeah. So first of all, I get asked about the Homeland thing all the time.
I should say call it stuff. I apologize for that.
That's all right. So just to dispel any misperception, it is not indeed like Carrie Matheson,
right.
We're not running around the world doing crazy things every day, but it is important, serious work. Yeah. I think my national security background, my homeland security background will position me to really be an extremely strong advocate for some of the new things we need to be thinking about, some of the new threats around the corner, right? What are we doing on cybersecurity, right? We all know that we're seeing these new kinds of attacks, What happens if we see a cyber attack on one of our electrical grids or on our water systems. You know, are we prepared for the threats of the future? And that's something I think I know quite a bit about. And then, you know, being a leader on national security issues from the day I walk in the Congress, I think that would be an asset. And certainly this district, Mike Rogers was the representative here. He was a national FBI guy. He was the head of the Intel Committee. I actually testified many times in front of Mike Rogers and briefed him many times. So the district has a history with someone who's strong on homeland defense and national security. So I'm hoping that will keep people's minds open.
At the moment, do we have it right in the Middle East?
Oh, geez.
I know that's a long question.
Yeah. Listen, I think our history in the Middle East has been extremely, extremely complicated since 9/11. I don't think anyone's happy with our policy in the Middle East.
Okay, let me ask you a better question.
Yeah.
Why is it that for 75 years we've stuck our nose every place in the world except we want to make everybody else be like us? Wouldn't it be once in a while just maybe pick up our cards and go home?
Yeah, you know, I think
800 bases around the world. There's no Japanese, there's no Chinese, there's no Russian air base any place in Michigan, but we have them all over the world. You've spent time overseas.
Yeah.
Should we? I get that we're the world's policeman, and I get that that's the same doctrine we've used since 1945. Eisenhower's been dead for the best part of 40 years. Do we pull back?
Yeah. So I believe that the United States should be the leader in the world on international affairs. I do believe we have a strong role to play in the international system. That's been true for many, many years, and I believe that's still true. And that's one of the things I worry about sometimes.
Despite the fact that we have the smallest military we've ever had in terms of population?
It's still listen, I'm an Army wife, folks on my team are military spouses. We are still the best military in the world.
No doubt.
And I have full faith in our military and their ability to keep us safe. But I do believe that given our global role, that sometimes we need to we can't just hole up in the United States and keep to ourselves and be isolationists and hope that everything's going to work out okay. I don't think that's right. Now, could we be smarter about our engagement around the world? 100%.
Could we be smarter about the way we spend our military money?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you know, there's this perception that, you know, every dollar that the military spends is going towards the troops, towards their training, towards their support, and that's just not true.
I could take you to a place in Warren where there are 400 tanks sitting, who the Army told them they didn't want them, and Rogers voted for them anyway. And they're sitting and rusting at a cost of something in the neighborhood of $2.5 million a tank. How does that stuff happen? When in Oakland County there are 40,000 kids that are hungry.
So we definitely, you know, part of hopefully what would be helpful in my background is I understand the Department of Defense budget probably more than most.
Right.
And I understand the difference between waste and then something that actually supports people like my husband, the actual warfighter. And that's what we need to focus on, not sort of extra fat for whatever congressional delegation comes around. And I think that we've seen a little bit of that. You know, you talk to our military, they have a strategy, warfare is changing, and they need definitely need more resources for the roles of the future. That doesn't mean we just throw money at it wastefully without understanding how it fits into the military strategy.
If you had a magic pen, could you spend the same amount of money and be safer?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Doesn't that sound sad?
Well, that's why we need people who understand these issues in Congress, right? Because, you know, I think the likelihood that we're ever going to be fighting a tank war with another enemy in the next 50 years is probably low. It made a lot of sense when, you know, my grandfather was fighting in World War II. But for today, we're more likely to have a cyber attack than we are to have, and we see that now with reports coming out about North Korea conducting cyber attacks. We're more likely to see that, deniable cyber attacks, than we are tank warfare. So where should we be investing our money?
We pay 10 major countries not to have armies that haven't engaged with us in 75 years. I mean, I get the foreign policy process of things, and I think there's a lot of things we don't know as citizens.
Sure.
That would make some sense, and I think there needs to be covert action because you can't run an operation, a world. The CIA should be the strongest, you know, informational process in this country to keep us safe with a free press from that standpoint. But you just see all of the, you know, the $500-page tax bill, and then you start to read page 479 and 499, and they start putting on, you know, rubber tires for a wagon in Wisconsin, you know, that type of thing.
Sure.
And that has to change.
Yeah, I think that government, in a world where we're all getting so much information and social media has become such a big part of our lives and reality programming, there's still a lot that goes on in government in Washington that's behind closed doors, that's not transparent. And I think one of the things that's important to me is engaging with people, being transparent about what we're doing, right? I want people to hold me accountable. I want people to check in on what I'm doing, right? That's my responsibility as a public servant. And I think our Congress has not yet gotten the message that people want to hold them accountable. And if they won't allow themselves to be graded, well, it's just like any student in a school, right? If you're not going to allow yourself to be graded, you're not going to keep your seat.
I just want a quick right-hand turn just briefly.
Sure.
There's a lot of empirical evidence that Africa is the correct, in 10, 12, 15 years, is the next great place with all of the stuff going on in Somalia and Yemen and some of the kinds of things that are happening. With your world perspective, is that a fairly accurate statement, that Africa is the next place where everybody's going to end up?
It's definitely a place
because of resources and all the things.
Yeah, it has huge growth potential, right? So I think companies around the world, both American companies, European companies, and Chinese companies and Russian companies, are interested in what they can do in Africa to partner with governments there. So it's definitely an area of huge potential, but there are also conflicts there that pose a risk to us, to Europe, so we have to watch it very closely.
So my question in that is the farther we move south in the hemisphere,
Yeah.
are we involved in African tribalism the way we might be in tribalism in the Middle East, politically?
That certainly shouldn't be anyone's goal, right? Our goal...
What I'm saying is that's something we should recognize. Is Africa based on geopolitics, or is it really more tribalism?
Yeah, I think it depends, right? I think it depends on where you go. Africa is a really big place. There are a lot of different countries. There are extremely modern cities with skyscrapers, and there are areas that are extremely austere, where we don't have a ton of information on what's happening. So you can't treat it as a monolith. You got to look place by place.
Johannesburg doesn't look like Yemen.
No. I mean, certainly.
Okay. Give us your plans over the next. You're obviously running next November.
Yep.
So it's sort of dog and pony show. This is a full-time job.
It is.
Putting things together, raising money, and going through the rest of it. What's it going to cost you to run for a congressional seat?
Well, this is, like I said, between gerrymandering and campaign finance, these are the two things that have the biggest effect on our political system right now in a negative way. So what I can tell you is what my opponent, Mike Bishop, spent on his race last time. In 2016, him and his party spent $2.5 million on this race, right? So you have to assume that that's associated, essentially, a similar price tag, which is unbelievable. I don't think people realize how much money people spend on one congressional seat.
The party's figuring $4 million this year for this district.
I think that certainly, $2.5 million is what he spent last time, and if I do my job and I actually compete...
Does that make sense to you?
No, that's what I'm saying. It almost kept me out of the race, right? Understanding the role of money in politics almost kept me out of the race. So, especially if you want to run a clean, transparent campaign, where people know who's giving you money, where you're open, your books are open, and you will be honest about who gives you money. And I'm willing to do that, right? Last quarter, 96% of my donors were individuals, right? We had a couple of law firms in there. But my opponent last quarter, it was 35% of his money were individual donors. The rest were corporate PACs and special interests. I don't want to run like that, and it's hard.
I went to a Christmas party where my wife works, and it's a very large company, and it's owned by the Koch brothers.
Yeah.
And I play golf and coach with some of the executives, and they know when I sit at the table, they don't bring up politics. We just don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and part of it goes back to a $4 million point. And one of them made an interesting point. Of the last decade, folks going into Congress that were not, or the Senate, that were not millionaires, came out as millionaires in their net worth. I don't know if that says anything.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that...
I think that says something.
It is, and then you look at the numbers. Should the election system be shorter? Should we do, should this be a 6-month campaign, and you're only limited to spend X amount of dollars?
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone, certainly in the public, who enjoys, certainly our presidential races have become 2-year affairs. I think people would probably welcome having a really abbreviated election season and a cap on the amount you could spend. It would certainly level the playing field, and it would keep a lot of those really sort of polarizing conversations limited to a certain time of the year.
How can you stay independent when you have to raise $10,000 a day as a congresswoman
Yeah.
and say to me that it's transparent?
Yeah.
I don't know how that happens.
Yeah, because if you're someone like me and you decide to run a clean campaign, you're basically asking individuals, people like you, people like your viewers, for small dollar donations to help cover what you know your opponent is making from corporate special interests. And I'll tell you what, there have been lots of examples in the past 5 years of politicians who've decided to run clean campaigns who have actually raised quite a bit of money from the $10 donors, the $20 donors. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to focus on individuals and earning people's support, earning people's vote. And I believe in that. That's our original system, is that if you appeal to people and you show them that you're willing to fight for them, then they come out and support you with what they have. And that's been my experience.
I don't want to get into negative politicking at this point. We're way too early in the process. But you're going up against somebody who has taken all kinds of money from special interests.
That's his choice.
Mike Bishop has taken money from Maddie Malone and all stuff with the bridge.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things. And not to say it's a bad thing. If you got money, I guess you're looking. But if you're giving X amount of dollars, if you're giving hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars to somebody, you expect some influence.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, right?
How are they not going to have influence over you?
Because I'm not, I'm not right now taking corporate PAC dollars from these same special
Will you?
interests. I don't think so. I can't
Even
see
if it means winning
scenario.
or losing?
I think, I'm not going to win if I take corporate special interests. I will tell you that right now. People do not believe that it's healthy for our system. So that's not a path to victory for me. And you know what? Mike Bishop might outraise me, but at least I have my integrity, and I know that I did it in a way that I'm proud of.
I'll get opinionated for a second. When I said we're at the bottom coming out, I believe there's a place and time, and I think that place and time in my lifetime for you is right now. I believe that somebody that does have the right interest, somebody that's not a white male, almost anybody that's not a white male, can run for office with the right understanding. And I think that the next year's election will be so overwhelming to that uplift of where we're headed. I think it'll send a strong message, and that's the reason I'm asking, because I think you can do things transparently. I think you can do things that make some sense.
Yeah, I think that's the role of a leader, is to actually demonstrate that you can do it in a clean, healthy way, right? It doesn't do any good to say, well, the system's corrupt, so I'll be corrupt too. That's not what leadership is. That's not what I learned in my career being a public servant. You have to actually demonstrate leadership.
If you're successful at winning, where would you like to see yourself in terms of subcommittees?
Oh, I don't know. I'm focused on the campaign right now. Certainly I have a national security background, so I would hope that at least in some part that would help raise the level of conversation in Washington. But I also am interested in making sure we have sort of strategic plans on our jobs and economy, on healthcare, on prescription drugs. So I think that's putting the cart in front of the horse, but something that actually helps people back here at home. That's what is the most important thing to me.
Should big pharmacy and Wall Street types, right now the new tax laws are going to allow hedge managers to basically be essentially taxed at about a 14% rate based on if they pass this new legislation. Yet their assistants are going to be at 28, 30% because of the way they have done some of the legislation. It just seems a little odd to me that we're not cleaning the swamp out. Should we be harder should we be tougher, and I guess this is my last question, should we be tougher on white collar crime?
On what?
White collar crime?
Interesting. I think everyone I've heard has said that this tax bill is certainly going to be a boon to CPAs as they try and figure out how to understand it. I certainly think white collar crime fits into this bigger conversation about corruption in Washington. And I think we just need some sunlight. We need to open up those doors and windows and put some sunlight on all of the corruption that's going on in Washington right now, whether that's technically legal or illegal. If it's white collar crime, obviously people should be prosecuted. I think there's a number of things that go on every single day legally in Washington that need to be looked at. Certainly taking money from people you regulate. I think there's some interesting things there that are maybe technically legal that are deeply questionable.
Last question, why should I vote for you?
Yeah. I think the people of this district deserve a representative who's going to listen to them, be available to them, seriously consider what is most important to them and then fight for them, right? I think that everyone I meet, Republican, Democrat, Independent, they just want someone who actually cares enough to fight and who remembers that they are a public servant first.
Okay.
And that I will do.
That's a great mission statement if I were writing a brochure. What is it about you that I don't know? That isn't a mission statement. What is it about out of your heart that I don't know about you?
Yeah, I know how to get things done. I know how to work, compromise, hear people out, and get things done. And if there's anything we need in Washington, it's a group of people who know how to get something done, because it's paralysis right now. So that, we don't know each other very well, but from my national security background, from my career previously, I know how to get things done.
Cool. Well, we appreciate your time,
No
and I'm
problem.
sure that they're going to hopefully have another conversation with you
I
next
would love
summer.
that. I would love that.
We've been talking with Elissa Slotkin, who is running for the 8th Congressional District here in Michigan against Mike Rogers and
Mike Bishop.
Mike Bishop. Mike Rogers
Happens all the
is
time.
another guy.
Happens all the
It's a whole
time.
other story. He's now a CNN guy, but reality, at any rate, I won't call it stuff anymore either. For the guys in the back and for Elissa and myself, Greg Norman, we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks so much.